Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Winter 2023 FCI Live series. Thanks so much for being here and being a part of it. Today's session is Building the Store Your Members Expect. We have Siobain Mitchell, a co-op consultant, here with us, who has been working with the Siobain Food Co-op for quite a while and doing governance training on GM transition and how the board and the GM build a relationship, build a reporting relationship, build trust to make a terrific leadership team for the opening of the store. And so we were talking about some of the challenges that Stage 3 co-ops keep saying, I wish there was more information on this. I wish there was more information on that. And one of them was just, how do we make sure that the store that is built, like we hire the GMs because we think they're the person for the job and hopefully we build trust, but the store really reflects what the owners had thought and expected they were going to get. And of course, there's always ways we can't meet all their expectations, but we have seen stores. They're standouts, they're only a couple, they're not all of them, but stores that upon opening did not really reflect what the owners expected, and it really impacted the co-op's success. So how does the board participate in making sure that the store they build, that the GM builds, that they in partnership make sure comes to life, is what the owners are expecting? And that's what Siobain's going to be covering for us today. Thanks so much for being here, Siobain.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you to all of you for showing up to attend my session. I really appreciate that. So I don't have a slide deck. I was just going to sit here and talk. So I hope that you guys will ask me questions. I'd really like this session to be interactive, right? So if you can use the raised hand function, that's great. If your camera is off, because you don't want to be on the video, that's fine. If you want to drop your question into the chat, JQ is going to help me out by making sure that that chat gets monitored. So I do recognize some of you, and I recognize a lot of your names. So I think that most of you are fairly far along in your organizing, but I wonder, and I know some of you have your cameras off, but I guess if you could just drop it into the chat if you are a stage 1 or like an early stage 2 co-op versus the stage, the late stage 2 and stage 3 co-ops that that I already know.
If you're not close to having a location, you're probably in stage 2 or stage 2A or 1. So then you throw that in the chat.
Okay. We'll just get crack-a-lackin' then. So for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Siobain Mitchell, and my home co-op is Siobain Co-op Market. We are Metro West of Boston. We are under construction, and we're going to be opening in the next 3 to 4 months. So that is incredibly exciting. It's incredibly exciting. So we had actually hired our general manager 2 years ago. It's been a full 2 years that we've had our GM, and that was not on purpose. That was not by design. We actually had secured a location and announced it, and we had gone through the first phase of our capital campaign. And we hired our general manager. They started in January of 2021. And we were thinking that we were going to be open, certainly by the beginning of 2022. And then as we kind of got into the property a little bit more, it actually became obvious that it wasn't going to work for us. So we had to bail on the location, but we kept the general manager because they're awesome and amazing. I don't know if any of you or other folks from your boards went to Sam's session yesterday on transitional reporting, but it was a really great session. So the one silver lining from all of that was that we actually then got to kind of slow down a little bit and spend a good amount of time just with Sam in those, especially those initial first months. And we just took our time with the onboarding process and starting to move things over to them, starting to delegate that authority to them. So we had a really positive period of time where we were kind of building that relationship with our GM and building trust. So when we at ASABET, we're a policy governance board. And, when we started learning about policy governance, we read the stuff, probably the same stuff that you've read if you've started learning about it already, the stuff that's out there. And conceptually, we kind of understood how it was supposed to work, right? So you have these executive limitations on one side, and you have the ends on the other side. And those policies form a kind of bookends for the general manager's work, right? And as long as they're staying away from those limitations and moving towards your ends, they have a lot of latitude in the middle to do their job, right? Any reasonable interpretation. And then, of course, the role of the board is to read reports. That's essentially what we learned about policy governance before we actually started using it. And I don't think it really works all that well for startups, right? This kind of very kind of rigid way of thinking about policy governance, I think is great for open co-ops, right? For established co-ops. When an open co-op brings in a new general manager, the store is already there, right? And the culture is already there. And whatever the vibe is in the place, it's established, it's already there, right? Depending on how long that co-op has been open, there are potentially decades worth of sales history that GM can then go look at and say, okay, what are people buying, right? And what programming is working really well in the store? What kinds of programming is successful, right? So with a startup, we just have our vision, right? That's it. So I actually really like policy governance. Let me maybe go back and say that. I actually really like policy governance. But it's just a tool, right? It's a framework for how you oversee your general manager, right? And the framework is designed to ensure that you have all of the information that you need to fulfill your fiduciary obligation, right? And to make sure that you understand, really clearly, how the store is operating, right? And it also makes sure that you're not micromanaging your general manager, right? So the phrase that you hear a lot is nose in, but hands out, right? So it is really important to have that line between governance and operations. It's really important to respect that line, okay? But somehow, this kind of very rigid way of thinking about policy governance, it makes it sound like you can't ask questions. And you can't just sit down and have a conversation with your general manager. And that's not true. You can, and you should, right? So we'll get to ends in a minute, because I know that's why everybody's here. But I think we should just talk for just a second about talking to and talking with your general manager. You have to have stated norms of behavior, right? And everybody on your board has to agree to them, right? It cannot be a free-for-all of individual directors reaching out to the general manager, offering opinions. That is not a good way to do things, right? And we could do a whole session just on this, like talking with your GM, or talking, when are you talking to your general manager, and are you using one voice as a board versus kind of a more less formal kind of a conversation where people can express their opinions. But you have to work to create a structure, that kind of guides how individual directors and you as a board are interacting with your general manager, right? I think most of us have had a boss that we did not like working for, that it was, just maybe pretty miserable having to work underneath them. And if we wanted to, I'm sure all of us in this room could come up with a really long list of all the horrible things that we could do to really screw up being a supervisor for our general manager, right? There's a lot of examples. I think a lot of us probably have real world experience of working with a supervisor that, for whatever reason, was not great, right? But I'm going to assume that all of you guys are going to do a really good job, and you guys are going to be really good bosses, right? So I think that it's safe to assume that whoever you hire as your general manager, whether they have co-op experience or not, that they're not going to come in and they're not going to look at your store design, and they're not going to start creating sections in the store for hard alcohol and cigarettes and firearms, right? So you're going to get a grocery store, right? But as JQ was saying in the beginning, like, we've seen problems, and we've seen, unfortunately, we've seen a couple co-ops close, which is just heart-wrenching, right? And that happened because the store that was opened, it didn't look like the store that the members and the community thought that they were going to get, right? So I actually remember, I'll share a story because we're doing really well on time. I'll share a story. I remember going way back when Assabet started organizing. Dinosaurs roamed the earth. I'm not sure that the car had been invented yet. And I went to a training, JQ, I think you were there. It was sponsored by the Neighboring Food Co-op Association, which is our regional association of open and startup food co-ops here in New England. And I remember this so specifically. So the training that we got, all of us startups that were in the room, the training that we got was that if somebody asked you what you were going to sell, the only correct answer that you should give is, that's going to be up to the general manager. And I remember it so clearly because I thought that was just dumb in the face. And I hated that answer. And I just could not wrap my brain around it, right? And I just was envisioning standing behind a table at the farmer's market, which I'm sure a lot of you have done, and having a conversation with somebody right? You want them to join. You're telling them about this amazing thing that you're working to bring to your community. And if they asked me the question, well, what are you going to sell? Like the last thing I would say to them would be, oh, well, that's going to be up to the general manager. Because then the person would be like, well, how do I know if I want to join? Like, how do I know if I'm going to shop there? And so we never answered the question that way, right? We talked about healthy food. We talked about local food, right? We talked about, the fact that we were going to be a full service grocery store, right? So the intention was to have, kind of all the sections that you would expect to find. It's not going to be the size of a super Stop and Shop, but it'll have produce and dairy and, grocery items. Those are the answers that you give to a question like that, right? So when you hire your general manager, this kind of initial onboarding process is kind of intense, right? And depending on where you're at in your project and in your timeline, it's possible that you'll be, partway through construction even. I will keep my fingers crossed for all of you that you're able to bring your general managers in, earlier than kind of that very last possible second. So it's possible though, that you may be doing this onboarding, at like double or triple speed. It's so important though, not to skip stuff, right? Even if you're, even if you're really pressed for time and you're like, oh my gosh, we have all this stuff going on and there's a store design meeting on Thursday and we want you to come to it. It's really important not to kind of skip steps in the orientation, right? And there's all kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of information that you have to share with your general manager, right? You have to orient them to your pro forma and to your business plan and to your market study. You have to show them how you keep your books. There's a lot, right? But part of what you need to be orienting them to, part of the information that you need to give them in this process, is information about you, about your project, about your community, about your vision for the store, right? And you need to be talking to them about how you've been talking to your community about the store. These questions these answers that you're giving, or your volunteers or your outreach coordinator, if you have an outreach coordinator, whatever those talking points are, for when you're talking to somebody that you're trying to get them to join, trying to get them excited for the project, you need to give all that same information to your general manager, right? So that they have a really clear understanding of how, what the members expect. Now, does this mean that they can do every single thing on your wish list? Absolutely not, right? You're not going to open with 75 different programs, right? But fundamentally, that picture, that picture of what your owners think you're going to create for them, that has to be painted in kind of a very vivid way. So, and then so like I said, that conversation should be starting during the orientation process, but then it continues, right? That's an ongoing conversation that you can be having with your general manager, and especially if you haven't started store design yet, if they're going to be in charge of store design, that piece of it needs to be kind of front and center, right? So ends, so guidance on ends. I've seen, I've worked with a couple different startups that have done it in a couple different ways. I don't think that there's a rule. I don't think that there's a wrong way to do it necessarily.
Siobain, I wondered, actually, I'm going to pause for a second.
Sure.
Do you want to pause and see if there's anything, because we're going to move into like ends and how that interprets into the store. And do we want to see if there's any question or discussion about some of that GM board relationship building and onboarding the GM? Were there any comments, questions that arose from that? All right.
Did I just scare you all?
Quiet group today. Do you mind starting with just a little explanation of what ends are within policy governance? Oh, wait, let's see. Got a couple things popping up. No questions, good messaging.
A community survey. Yeah, absolutely. If you've done community surveys, you should absolutely be giving the survey results to your general manager. Yes, absolutely. Right? And I'm sorry, JQ, ends. Do you want me to talk a little bit about what ends are? Okay.
Yeah, if you can just situate what ends are within policy governance. Not everyone here knows what that is, and then build from there. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So the ends are, it's a very specific, okay, so let me go back. I'll just take a few minutes and I'll do like the basic policy governance stuff. There are 4 kinds of policies in policy governance, right? The executive limitations policies are all the things that your general manager can't do or allow to happen or cause to happen. And it's all really bad stuff, right? So the GM can't bounce checks. The GM can't, be late filing your taxes. The general manager can't, allow sales to be inadequate. It's all these really bad things that the general manager cannot cause or allow to happen, right? And those are the things they have to stay away from. And then there are 2 kinds of policies that they're board policies. So there's board process policies, and those are just kind of really fancy guidelines. Like if you have like a healthy, good, high functioning board, I'm assuming you have written guidelines, right? And so the board process policies are like those, only bigger and better, and there's more of them, right? But they guide your work. And then there are GM linkage policies. And those are the policies that dictate how you as a board do your job of supervising the general manager, right? And how you're going to delegate authority to them, and how they're going to be in charge of operations, and how you're going to communicate with them, and all of these things. So the GM linkage policies kind of go through and kind of dictate all of that stuff. And then you have your ends. And ends, they're very aspirational, right? And they're written in kind of a specific way. Your ends statement is supposed to answer 2 questions. What benefit you're bringing and who that benefit is for, right? So it's this really aspirational list of the ways that you are going to be awesome and amazing, and you're going to do all this good in and for your community. And they're supposed to be short. It's not supposed to be, a 3-page document. It's supposed to really be a list. I think that the guidance is to have it be your top 3. I will say at Acibet, it's like our top 7. Our ends policies are incredibly long for ends. I mean, it only takes up half a page on a PDF, but they are longer, I think, than most other co-ops. And if you're interested, so our full policy register is on our website. You can go to, it's Assabet, ASSABET, market.coop. And you'll find them there along with our bylaws, which nobody ever reads, but that's okay. So you have these aspirational statements, right? And then you have this general manager who's actually going to open your store. And there's a pretty big gap between just giving them the ends and the information that they actually need in order to open the store that you've been talking about. And, you know, like I said, nobody achieves their ends in their first year of operations, right? So the goal is to make incremental progress towards achieving your ends, right? But again, there's a lot that's unsaid. If all you're doing is giving your new GM your ends policy and telling them, okay, this is where we're going. These are the amazing things that we're going to try to achieve through our hopefully decades of continued operations in our communities, right? There's a lot that goes unsaid. Oh, would you please repeat the two main items? Oh yeah, so it answers two questions. And the first question is what benefit you're gonna bring, or like what good are you gonna do? And then the second question is, and who's the beneficiary of that? Who is the benefit for, right? So, you know, obviously in our end statement, we talk about our community, right? We talk about our members, we talk about our community. And so, you know, we want to benefit both, not just our owners, right? But our community as a whole as well, right? Does that help? Is that helpful for people?
Seems like a good foundation, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think that where some of the confusion with policy governance starts is with the word interpretation. And when you start learning about policy governance and when you start reading all these manuals, you will see that word over and over and over and over again, this concept of reasonable interpretation. And that is something that the general manager does. You give them the policies and they interpret the policies, right? But like I said, I don't like the word interpretation. Because to me, I think it implies that they can do a lot more than they really can, right? And so in policy governance, the word interpretation it's a synonym, it's synonymous with operational definition, right? Those are the exact same thing. So anytime you're reading an article or a manual, or you're going through the stuff that's on the Colluminate website, or if you haven't read the GM transition guide that's on FCI's website, you should do that. And every time you see the word interpretation, I want you to think in your head operational definition, right? So that general manager is going to operationalize your ends. So I was gonna kind of talk through a couple of examples next, and I'm gonna start with some food ones. But if there are other people who have other ideas, but we can totally do that as well. Oh, and a JQ just threw the link to that GM workshop in the chat for y'all. So thank you, JQ. So talking about food. If you have ENDS policies, I bet it talks about food. And if you don't, I bet you will. Because that's, we're opening grocery stores, right? So we want to talk about the food. So our ENDS, we talk about healthy food. Now, does that mean that our general manager is free to look at that and say, oh, well, I think that if it's going to be healthy food, that means that everything has to be vegan? No. Or everything is going to be organic? Again, no, right? But what we need to be doing as startups is we need to be really clearly communicating what we mean. What did Siobain mean? What did the board mean when we were talking about improving access to healthy food in our community, right? We were talking about clean conventional, right? We were coming at it from this idea of like, well, food is medicine, right? And for people who eat a lot of fast food, or they're doing some grocery shopping at the 7-Eleven, that food that they're consuming is less healthy, right? And that there are, impacts from that, right? And so we want to be a place where people can access healthy food, right? So, I think different startups have done it different ways. This is kind of a work in progress. We're kind of co-creating this right now as we go, right? So this kind of, last year and this year, the startups that are opening have been kind of doing this together, and saying how are we going to do the GM transition, and how are we going to move into policy governance? What kinds of things should we be talking about with our general manager? It's evolving kind of in real time. So Grant, I think at Chicago, I think you guys put some of this stuff into your executive limitations. Is that correct?
Well, per the workbook and advising, we wrote a mission transition plan that covers that.
Okay, yes, great.
In great detail. I'll put both our governance doc and our mission transition plan are on this page. It's in the chat.
Great, thank you.
It's that mission transition thing that sunsets once we're open and fully operational, but it gets the store better defined as you're talking about.
Great. And then there was another startup that I worked with, and they actually had gone in and they created additional sub-policies under their global end. Most co-ops, most policy registers, there's just the one ENDS policy and that's it. But I think it was Wild Onion. I'd have to go back and look. But they created additional ENDS policies, and they had an ENDS policy. When we say local, this is what we mean. When we say sustainable, this is what we mean, right? And at Siobain, we actually didn't put it in our policy register at all. We just created a document that we then shared with our general manager, and it just went through. And it said, when we mentioned healthy food, this is what we were talking about. This is how we meant it. When we talk about sustainability, this is what we were thinking. This is how we were conceiving of the project. Now, none of it is, I just want to make sure that I say this in a good way. There are some things that kind of function as have tos, right? In a store, and in your store, there will be things that are have tos, and then there will be things that are want tos, and it would be really nice if, right? So, for example, you have a market study, you have a sales forecast. And if it was Debbie or Dakota or whatever, somebody forecasted your sales based on a certain set of assumptions about what you were going to sell, right? So for you to achieve those sales, you have to either have all of those departments that the market study analyst thought that you were going to have, or you have to go back to your market study analyst, right? Things like having solar panels, an array of solar panels over the parking lot, that's not so much a have to, right? That's like it would be really great if. And for you, it's going to depend on, well, it's going to depend on a lot of things, but it's going to depend on how much your project costs and how much you bring in and the way that you bring it in, whether you can afford or if you can get a grant to cover part of it, but like how, like, you know, because there is a cost associated with either the purchase or lease of a crazy number of solar panels, right? So it would be nice if, but it's not a have to, right? So coming back to the operational line, this line between governance and operations, because it is really important to respect that line. And it's really important that you fully empower your general manager to be in charge of operations. That's their job. That's what you've hired them to do. And presumably, you're hiring your general manager because they're good at it, right? That they have professional skills and competencies that we as board members probably don't have, right? Most co-op boards don't have directors who've run grocery stores before, and that's okay, right? So let me give you an example. And again, we're gonna do more food, local food, right? That's another big one that you see a lot of co-ops talking about, right? We want to support the regional food system, right? We want to have local food in our store. Now, if there are additional things that we care about as a board, again, we're going to say it. We're just going to say to our general manager, local is more important than organic, right? So if there's a local farm, and even if they're not an organic farm, they should still be considered because local and clean conventional is more important to us than organic, right? There might be other considerations because we are values-driven organizations, right? So are you concerned about, the employment practices on that farm, right? Do you want to specifically support BIPOC farmers and producers, right? All of those things, you communicate that to your general manager, but then your general manager is going to operationalize it. And so the GM, what counts as operations then is the GM is going to say how much of which produce from what farms and when, right? That's the operational side of it, right? So we're telling our general manager, local is important. And we're saying beyond local, even we have values and we need those values to be represented, right? But it's an operational decision which farmers to bring in as suppliers to the co-op. And it's your general manager's job to put together the sourcing criteria, right? And that is going to be somewhat values driven, and it's going to be business driven. Does this particular farm have the capacity to grow? I don't even know how many tons of carrots a co-op orders because I've never run a food store before, but I imagine it's a lot of carrots, right? So, JQ, did somebody have a question or?
They did, and I also wanted to bring the question to you. Are there any places where you guys set some of those guidelines, some of those definitions, and your GM and you had a discussion where, you know, they had an alternate concept or a little bit of pushback? Because I would say that's a healthy part of this too, is you set them, you're still listening to the GM. They might come back on a few of them and go, this might need a tweak. Do you have any examples of that?
Sure. Sure, yes. But just sticking with food for just a minute, you know, one of the things that our GM came back to us on, and they were very specific, it's going to take a little while to get local food in the door. We are not going to open with 20% local produce. Now, we didn't dictate, right? You can't dictate. You can't say 43.5% of the produce has to be local. You just say things like, we want to prioritize local, right? And it's an operational decision, but most co-ops have about 20% local produce, local products in their store. Mm-hmm. So that is our goal, right? You know, Sam came right back to us and said, it's going to take a while. It's not going to be in that first year, right? We'll be able to get some local suppliers in, and that is being worked on right now, right, at Siobain. That is actively being worked on right now. But it's going to take a little bit of time, right?
I do have several questions.
Yes, good.
So
thank you.
What is the breaking down of the meanings behind the ends document called? What did you call that? It sounds like a great idea. And there's a second piece. We'll start there. I think you're talking about, you called it, I'd call it interpretation, you called it definitions, right?
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. So the concept is that basically what's being described here, it is the fact that you have, as a board, you have rules and you have goals, but the general manager has to turn that into a nuts and bolts reality in the store, mm-hmm. right? So it may be in your end statement that you want to have community programming, right? Again, that's another thing that we love to do. Co-ops love to have community programming. If any staff time is spent on that, that is an operational decision. The general manager gets to decide how many staff hours get spent on the programming, because the general manager is in charge of the budget, right? So partnering with local organizations, same idea, right? We want to partner with, we have 2 different food pantries here in town, right? And we want to partner with them in a meaningful way. And we have community organizations, we have an anti-racism alliance, but it's up to the general manager to make decisions about what those partnerships look like. And especially if it is involving staff, because staff costs money and the GM is in charge of the staff and the GM is in charge of the budget, mm-hmm. right?
So I'm going to stop you there because those were great examples. So I let you go, but she just wanted to know the term, which I think is definitions.
Yeah. So the term that you see a lot in the literature, the term that you see is reasonable interpretation. So the word is interpretation, right? And in policy governance, the term interpretation is synonymous with operational definition, right? I don't like the word interpretation because it makes me think, I don't know, like an interpretive dance or something. Like they can just say, well, this is what I think that word means. And that's not really how it's supposed to be. What they're supposed to be telling you is how it's going to be manifest in the store, right? How is it being made real? Right.
And you have another question about where do you prioritize? You said you need to prioritize your have tos and want tos, which is excellent. Where did you do that work? Like, did you create a document? Like, where to do that work?
Yeah. So that was an ongoing conversation that we had with our general manager, right? So again, we do have ends because we have a full policy register, and our ends, again, weirdly long, but there are different things that we talk about in our ends. So of course, we're talking about the food. We're talking about sustainability. We're talking about partnering in the community, right? So, and then we put together, like I said, we just put together like a supplemental document. It's not even part of our policy register. We just literally sat down and just kind of expanded. We took the word sustainability and we just put it in writing. This is what we were thinking, right? But again,
so in a supplemental document, very similar to what Chicago Market, I think this provided you a link to, kind of a supplemental transitional definitions agreements document.
Yeah. And then we talked about it a lot, and we've had ongoing conversations with our general manager over the course of the planning for our store, what's possible and what's not, right? And that, again, our GM is in charge of the budget of operations. They're in charge. For us, they were in charge of store design because we had lost the site. But then we kept our GM. And so we had to start all over again. So our GM was in charge, was kind of running our site selection process and was completely in charge of that store design from the beginning. Again, with the same kind of bookends, right? If you think of these limitations and the ends as being kind of these bookends, same deal, right? So the limitation on SAM is that they can't not have all of the departments that our market study, that our sales forecasts were projected, assuming that we were going to have, right? That's the limitation, right? And then the values, the ends are where we're going. But we provided a lot of this supplemental information, and we had a lot of conversations, right? And so you have to be open. If your general manager is coming back and saying, well, guess what? We can't do solar panels over the parking lot right now. We can't, because we don't have the money. That's you have to be open. You can't just demand that they do it somehow. And in terms of, the sustainability of the building, we've added insulation. We are not going to have any fossil fuel. We're not going to have gas. We're not going to have fossil fuels coming into the store. Everything is electric. But
can I ask you more about the process? So it sounds to me like you guys at the ends, did you do any pre-interpretation and then share it with the GM? Like, how did this back and forth, how is it like played out as you worked through it?
Yeah, so we had finished our policy register. We were weird. We did ours actually in stage 2A. We did it a long time before most startups do theirs. So we had this pre-existing ends document. And it was when we came back and started getting ready to hire our GM. And we did we did a training with JQ. We did a training, it was actually Kay Kirsch from Firebrand did a training with us. And it was kind of during that process of us getting ready to hire the general manager that we included that on the list, right? So yes, we have to orient them to the pro forma. Yes, we have to orient them to the market study. And yes, we have to orient them to us, to our co-op, to our community, to our members, to and then orient them to our ends. And again, it is heartbreaking when a co-op opens after all of those years of organizing and member investments. It's heart-wrenching to watch a co-op struggle or God forbid, close. And there are other reasons that your co-op might struggle. But this is something that you can control. This is something that you can have a plan for, right? There are things you can't plan for, right? 3 years ago, nobody was like, oh, is this the year that we're going to have this global pandemic that's going to keep everybody in their houses for 5 months straight? Like you don't know what the future holds, right? But this is something that you can plan for, to have these conversations with your GM. And again, we could do a whole session on it. Obviously, these conversations have to be respectful, right? And you have to have these stated norms of behavior for how you're interacting with your GM. And if there are individual directors, usually it's just the board chair, for example, is having one-on-one conversations with your general manager. And it could be complicated for you. You might already have a store design. You might be halfway through construction. You might already have a general contractor or a project manager. But you plan. This is part of GM transition planning, right? That we just go through and we address all of the different scenarios and all of the different pieces.
If I can stress something you brought up earlier too, is that it was very much 5-7 years ago presented that, and then the magical unicorn named the GM shows up and they will just take your ends and decide everything. So the reason that Siobain's stressing some of this is those of you who maybe haven't been organizing quite as long are used to hearing the stage 3 startups who are opening soon talking much more empowered way about this stuff. But this is where we saw the fall apart, is that boards thought they just handed everything off and then they had to kind of just sit back. And they started to see things being developed in ways that are like, oh no, that doesn't feel quite right. But like, well, we'll gently talk about that and this but it felt like to both them and the GM that permission had already been handed over to do whatever they interpreted the ends to mean. And that's where we saw times that boards saw hints of the train wreck coming, but they literally felt, not only did they feel not empowered to stop it, the GM very much felt hired under the agreement that the board would not tell them anything about what to do in many ways, interpreting those ends. So I just wanted to stress again how much of a change this is for those of you who might not recognize that, and that it's come up because of real cases of this happening.
Yeah, and all of this can be done in a way that is still very empowering of your general manager and is still respecting the line between governance and operations.
And it's still very much in line with policy governance.
And it's
just
very
not
much in line with policy
one
governance.
Interpretation of it. But I love that you stress that there is absolutely, this is not outside policy governance. This is a way of looking at it that is adapted to startups in the startup phase. So we can get to the interpretation that established co-ops utilize.
Yeah, I'm sure someday the Alphabet board will do nothing but review policies. I will be long gone. And I will be very happy for them when that day comes, but there's just too much can go sideways, between now and then.
Well, I'm going to wrap us up. Siobain might be able to stay a minute or two after if people have additional comments and questions.
Sure.
Great. So if you want to continue the conversation off the recording a little more casually, feel free to stay put for a few more minutes after. But I'm going to do just a little of our wrap up and to start with thanking Siobain for coming and sharing all the knowledge she's built through her experience with all of you today so we can build better co-ops. So thanks so much to Siobain. And Siobain, did you want to mention how folks can contact you if they're interested in working with you on any of this board transition work that I know you're doing with some co-ops?
Yeah, sure.
You actually want to throw it in the chat?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw it in the chat. So it's kind of, it's like super secret. I don't have a Facebook page. I don't have a website. You just have to know how to find me. I have an email account and a Zoom. So I don't make you spell my name. You're welcome. So it's SM Co-op Consulting. I'm typing it in at Gmail.
All right, well, go ahead and type that in. Thanks so much to Siobain. And I just want to highlight, we've got some great stuff coming up. Tonight, we have Earning Your Owner's Business. If you're in stage 3 or 2B, I really recommend this session. This is with Peter Waldman, the general manager of Food Shed Co-op, and it spawned out of a conversation he and I had about how startup food co-ops assume that just because someone's an owner, they will shop at your store. And that is not the case. Like any other shopper, their business has to be earned. And he's going to talk about how a GM of a startup looks at that, what programs they build, what outreach they do to court those owners now as customers as you make the transition to having a store. Really informative, I think, for the board perspective to hear him talk about. And on Monday, we are so excited. We'll have LaDonna Sanders-Redmond here of Redmond Consulting with Colluminate talking about common threads, which will be her research on the U.S. cooperative movement and how its roots lie in slavery and cotton and how that has influenced the movement all the way up till today. So this is her first time presenting her research. If you've never seen her present before, you're in for a treat. I would highly recommend that one. And we are not going to be able to share the recording of this one because this is her first time presenting the research and she's going to be continuing to build on it and present it at other conferences. She's asked us not to share the video for 1 year. And of course, we're going to honor that. So if you want to see this presentation, you need to be there. And then Rethinking Market Studies. This is with the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, who are looking at how the current market studies serve Black communities and what something different that might be needed. They're doing an in-depth research project and they're going to present on their research so far and what they're going to be doing next with that project. Last but not least, I have to thank our sponsors who are with us, would not be happening today if it were not for them. Thanks so much to the USDA, to National Cooperative Bank, to National Cooperative Grocers, and to CoBank. We so appreciate it.